It's all right. They get sleep.
For him, no. Well, they have the, it's basically how do they have the clerical.
Just years is the worst.
It is. I know.
Yawning.
Yeah. Well, but then I wake up with the cracker down there. But then I'm falling asleep in my chair at 7 o'clock.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just being here.
This?
Yeah, I couldn't find it.
No, but you can have it if I can peek at it every now and then.
Well,
You can take it, you can take it. Oh, absolutely. Excellent.
because I know that's.
Does the information?
Call
Okay. Well, thank you.
the City Council work session to order. November 14th. Call of the roll.
Abby Hansen. Here. John Hawkins.
Here.
Megan McFarland. Here. Matt McKinney. Here. Logan Welch.
Here.
Call for motion to approve the agenda.
So moved. Second.
All those in favour say aye. Aye. Pledge of allegiance. Pledge of allegiance. Okay, I have item 4 is a resolution amending resolution number 2023-177 passed and adopted October 16, 23 for the disposal of city-owned right-of-way on 3rd Street line west of Fair Avenue.
This resolution and the subsequent 2 resolutions are tied to the Quickstar development. Zach and area have been in touch with Travis Small, finalizing the final details. So those are the resolutions that Zach helped together to finalize. The first one's going to be related to the vacation of the the 3rd Street right of way. That was part of the original boundary where they're going to develop. The city was going to vacate. So
Call for motion.
So moved.
Second. Unless anyone's got questions on it, I guess. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Item 5 is a resolution authorising the mayor to execute and the releases of easements previously recorded as documents numbers 74-1354 for 2019-1432, 2019-1435, and 2020-256.
this resolution is just tied to the easements that were existing on the parcels where Quickstar is going to be developed. Again, that was something that Ariel and Zach reviewed and prepared.
Move to approve.
Second. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Item 6 is a resolution authorising the mayor to sign and execute public utility easement in connection with the development located at 505 Fair Avenue in Webster City, Iowa.
In the same manner, this was tied to the actual public utilities that would be underneath the property.
Move to approve.
Second. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
David, is an update on the green waste disposal site. Got it.
We'll turn on the switch.
It's on.
So the gallery mic's off.
Not gallery mics, right? No, system.
System's on.
Yeah, it's on.
Okay. Yeah, so what do we, how's it filling in, I guess?
Bring it up real quick. Brandon's off at the Fort Dodge landfill meeting, getting an update on where they stand.
Mhm.
So I did talk to Brandon about how it's going. He did say that people are respecting the drop off during business hours. So based on where we're currently at, staff does recommend that we just keep it open through December 4th only for residents and continue to do the business hours only.
That's one comment I got from the community is some folks are struggling to get there during business hours. or not being open on Saturdays either, and I'm glad to hear that it's being respected. And I appreciate us moving forward on opening that up, but that is one piece of feedback I want to make sure is relayed to the rest of the council. That is, there are people struggling to get there on the weekends and evenings when they do their lawn work and it's not open. So, however, probably best for now, as is, but I guess what I'm getting at is, something to consider and think about, maybe accommodating at least like one Saturday or something. Moving forward to accommodate that.
You want to look at it, meeting in December, and you can have a look at it and see whether it's something we want to open it up. If it's not filled up too much, we could.
Or, one thing would be like designating a weekend. This is just an idea. And basically Brandon's team would just leave it open from Friday evening till, Friday morning till Monday after work. Kind of see how that weekend goes, But yeah, we can talk about this in another meeting. I'm just saying, like, that is one frustration that a lot of people are happy that the brush side is open. It's just hard to get there if they're, working 9 to 5s.
So do you think it's the 20th meeting or wait December 4th? You guys decided.
I think wait till November 4th, because it gives us some, December 4th, because it's going to give it some time to see how it goes. And that was another few days and go.
No.
As much.
And I definitely want it left open. So yeah, I just leave it as is, and then talk about it in a regular meeting.
And then I want you guys an update on the permit. So currently, originally we planned to purchase the larger unit, which was the S330E. After the engineer ran some modeling and did some calculations, our permit limit would limit us to 5 tons per hour. This machine can do a throughput of 13 tons per hour. So we basically be buying extra tonnage that we would be able to use. So the recommendation is that we go with the smaller unit, the S220, because the throughput is 5 to 7 tons per hour. So that would match up with our permit. And then once we do get the permit, we will have to have a 1 hour opacity test done once a month. And then any staff that operates the incinerator does have to be certified. So we'll have to get our staff certified through that training process. And then we do have the 12 months to get the Title V permit after that. So once that permit is submitted, we have 90 to 120 days waiting for DNR to issue it. So if you all are okay with it, I will just give them the green light to go ahead with the 220 instead of buying a larger incinerator.
I'm good with that.
Yep.
Can you remind us, if you have the figures, how much difference in price was that?
I don't remember the exact number, but it was about $60,000 difference.
That's what I was saying. Was.
Good to save money where you can.
Yeah.
Barry, will that be the electric model?
That will
Yes.
Oh.
just be a small.
Okay, so we could start the work session on electric and water rate analysis and any other matters that come before council. Even Blake.
So this evening, we're talking about both the electric utility as well as the water utility. We've had been working with DGR Engineering for the better part of the last several years on a number of things related to electric utility. Several years ago, the city commissioned DGR to do a broad system study to review the major components and infrastructure pieces of our electric distribution, to a certain extent, the transmission system components that we own within and just adjacent to the city limits. You have in front of you, and it's up on the screen. This is from the system study that was presented to the council, I think, in the early part of 2023. This is the capital improvement summary that DGR put together based on the components they identified, and they broke it out into, I think it was 3 phases. They've been working, council has approved various task orders with DGR to move forward with certain components of the phase 1. Primarily, the biggest one you guys have talked about recently would have been the construction of the Reisner substation and decommissioning of the past water substation. That was based off of the system study that identified the components at the past water substation were going to be reaching their useful life, and recommended that you start planning for replacement replacement of that substation. So I know Andy Koob was here at the last meeting, kind of gave you guys an update on that piece of it. So Blair has been working on the rate study side of things. And so he's been working with Doty and our team looking at our CIP as well as our operational needs, and has put together the recommendation and findings for the electric rate study. We did look at a couple different models. We've narrowed it down to the specific one that group came together a couple weeks ago to really kind of fine tune which option we'd want to go with. So on your forms and your papers in front of you, it's listed as option 3. And we can certainly go back and touch on option 1 and 2 to kind of give an overview, but this was the one that the group, when they met, kind of came out as the recommendation that we wanted to present to council to consider. And certainly as any questions you have, by all means, is not set in stone to make a decision on that, and whatever questions or information you have, we can certainly come back and ask Blair to come back and provide additional information. So this is really intended to provide a broad overview and provide any discussion and questions you may have that Blair or staff can provide. So with that, I will start Blair's PowerPoint. He can kind of go through it.
Okay, slide. So again, Blair Webster with DGR Engineering. As Daniel said, I'm working on the financial, the rate piece of this picture, the whole electric utility. It's been several years ago now. We actually started with the rate study and kind of put it to the side a bit and brought in the capital improvements plan because we had to figure out what it was we needed to do and build that in. So it was all kind of tied together. So now we're at the point where we have that all done, and so we can talk about this is how we got to pay for all this, and this is what we're talking about what we need to do with electric rates. Lots and lots of numbers. Your staff is seeing piles and piles of paper. You don't want to see them probably, so I'm going to be at the high points. Happy to give anybody more details if they want it, or go through any details at whatever time. But so whenever I do a rate study, I would say there's 3 pieces to it. The first of which is first bullet point up there is to establish the overall revenue requirements for the utility. What that means is how many dollars do we need to bring in our rates to make everything work, to pay for everything, to pay all the bills, to pay debt service and all those sorts of things. So that's the first piece. We have to figure that out. Once we've got that done, we go to the second one, which is what I call a cost of service study. So what that is we say, okay, now we know how much we need to have. Who should pay for what part? And that's a bunch of work that goes into looking at cost allocations and looking at rate classes and all kinds of things to try to figure out who should pay what and on what basis. So that's kind of the second piece is the cost of service study. The third one, if you want to bring that up, Daniel, is the last piece, which is to actually develop rates and propose rates that you could apply, adopt by council action, and then apply it to your customers. And so that's a 3-step process we went through. I'm going to talk about all 3 pieces tonight because we're at the point now where we're ready to have in front of you some rates. Let's go to the next slide, which is the overall financial status. And so I want to say before I begin, your electric utility is in good shape, in a strong position. I work for a lot of electric utilities. I can't say that everywhere. There's places that are really in tough shape. You're not one of them, which is a good thing. Whoever made decisions in the past was thinking ahead and building some reserves and putting yourself in a good spot. Yeah, we're at a point where we need to spend some money and it's going to be some big dollars, but you're in a spot where that we can take off and do that in a reasonable fashion. So the next bullet talks about a little bit what Daniel already mentioned. That is the amount of money that needs to get spent over the next several years. The numbers that he showed you that came from the study that we did is address what I would call the bulk system, your transmission, substation, major distribution circuitry. In addition to those numbers, your internal staff have put together some budget numbers for other projects that you already had talked about, putting some lines underground and things like that. So what we've done is we mashed it all together and put it together in one big model, which obviously you have to do or it's not going to work. And so in the next 5 years, we're showing a total of about $21.5 million, which is a big number. It's going to get spread over several years, so it's not all going to happen at once. You'll have opportunity to look at those as they come and decide if you want to move them out or whatever. But for now, the model includes that 21.5 million over about 5 years. So the question is, how do you pay for that? You know, what's that going to look like? And so I put up there a couple things. Number one is you do have some cash reserves. In my mind, there's some funds there that you could use to put toward the projects. In addition to that, you'll be generating some margins over the next couple of years because the utility is profitable. We can also use and spin into our capital projects. But then the final piece has to do with John Burmeister. John is here. He'll talk water with you later, I guess, but he also is going to be helping us find some funds to do the rest of the electrical work. Typically a bond or something similar that you would issue that would be debt financing that you would then pay off over some time period. And so as we get into that, we will be working together with him to figure that out. There's several moving pieces to all this. There's kind of bigger picture things that I don't have a lot of detail shown here, but part of the facilities that you'll be building are qualify for transmission assets and can be used by SPP, the Southwest Power Pool, via your relationship with Corn Belt. And so through that, you should be able to get reimbursement for a good share of that you'll actually have to front the money, build the facilities, but then they'll turn around and reimburse you for it. So that's a good thing. That will help. It's a little unclear exactly what that number looks like right now. We're working on it and staff negotiating with Corn Belt, and there's some work to do yet there. So I can't say for sure where that's going to end up, but I believe that my numbers here are on the high side, and I think we'll be in good shape once that gets done. So that's there's a bit of a moving piece to that. Obviously, we're in a time of high cost. Inflation is high. Trying to stay ahead of estimates. The numbers that Daniel showed you there are I'm sure on the low side. On the other hand, like I said, Corn Belt and that process should pay for some of it. So I think overall, I feel really good about where we're at as far as it pertains to my financial model and what it means to you. We'll be looking at that as we go forward and working on that with John and figure out what we do financing. My initial evaluation is there. You see that last note there in bold. We believe that you can do the work that we have laid out here, the 21.5 million that includes the work of our study plus your staff improvements that they've developed, with a series of relatively modest increases, something in the order of 3% per year for the next 5 or 6 years. Maybe better if we look at numbers and things turn out better, but it's that sort of number we're looking at. So in my mind, those are reasonable compared to what we're all seeing for inflation. But nonetheless, they're increases and that shouldn't be minimized. I believe, in my mind, they're modest in the sense that you're making investments in your system that have to get made. You've got an electric system here that does well for you. It's a good asset for the community. It has to be fed. It's kind of the thing that you always need to be doing things and staying ahead of things that wear out and so forth. So we believe we can do all the things that we need to do with relatively modest increases. And I'm going to talk about the proposed rates for fiscal 24. That's what we really have to focus on tonight because that's where you're at. And as I note there, the last bullet point, those do include the first of those 3% increases. So if you adopt the rates that I'm proposing at some point, those will have built in a 3% increase to get us started on that series of increases. Next year, when you look at rates, we'll see where things end up, cost-wise, financing-wise, all of that, and we can regroup at that point. We don't need to make increases, we won't, and so forth. But what we're talking now is the first set of that 3% increase, and that's a 3% overall increase across. I mean, that's the increase in average for your whole utility. I'll be talking more about what that means later, but keep in mind, we're talking 3% increase on average, what it would be for utilities. Okay, if you want to go to the next slide. So as I mentioned earlier, the second piece of all rate studies is the cost of service piece. And as a note on my title of this, that really has become the main focus of this rate study. Sometimes I need to go into places and say, you got to raise rates 20%. That gets to be a huge thing. And in this case, we're talking modest rate increases. The thing that is taking the time and really focus of this study has to do with the cost of service piece. And part of that is the first thing we do is look at your electric rates. We look at your existing rate schedule. We look at your rate classes, meaning how do you describe a certain customer? Are they a residential? Are they a commercial? Are they whatever, rural? And we look at those and try to make sure that they make sense and that they fit well. That they also fit with what the electric utility industry is doing currently as it changes. And so we look at the rate classifications. And then we also look at rate structure. And what I mean by that is how do customers get billed? Is it a flat amount that they pay just a flat number, or is it a flat amount plus a amount on the energy or kilowatt hours? Is there a demand charge? All those things get brought into play and when we look at that. And so that was kind of the big piece of this study and where the big changes that we're recommending are going to come into play. So I'll go through each of the rate classes here and we can talk about them. Residential class is what it is. There's no changes really proposed. It's easy to describe, who it is and the way the rates are structured, which is a flat customer charge plus a varying energy charge. That should stay the same. Everything's good to go there. Next bullet. So the second bullet there, what I call the smallest commercial customers, which I'm calling small commercial, which fits what I'm talking about. It's about 500 customers. So it's the bulk of your commercial type customers. It's a small, most people are pretty small. And so we're going to have a class called small commercial. It's about 500 customers. And essentially the structure is fine as well. It's a flat customer charge plus an energy charge, and that works. And so that's good. So that won't be a big change there for them. Where the changes will come into play are the next grouping of customers. You've got about 100 customers that are, say 25 kilowatts up to something more than 500 kilowatts. There's a group of about 100 customers that fit into that category. And what we're going to do, or what I'm proposing we do, is set up two classes for those customers. One is a large commercial class, and the other is what I'm calling an intermediate power class. And so there's like 82 large commercial and 16 intermediates. So you get fewer and fewer customers the bigger you get. And what that allows us to do then is to set the rates as tight as we can to what it really costs to serve them. And so that's what I'm proposing we do. The big change that they will see is that I'm proposing that we switch to what I call a structure that includes both a demand charge and an energy charge, in addition to the flat monthly customer charge. When I started looking at your rates, frankly, I was very surprised that you didn't have that already. It's the sort of thing that's been around for 30 to 40 years, and most utilities have that. If you look at any of the large ones, they of course do, and almost all of the municipals have it as well. I think we need to go there. I'm proposing we do that. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to hurt people, that they're going to pay more. They might actually pay less. That kind of depends on customer. And what I mean by that is it depends on how efficiently they use electricity. It's kind of the way I put it. So for a given amount of demand or given amount of load they put on the system, do they use it for a reasonable period of time, or do they turn it on and turn it off? Of course, want to reward those that turn it on and leave it on, because you're using your facilities and all the costs that you laid out to serve them more efficiently that way. And so it allows us to do that if we use that rate structure. So that's going to be a big change to some. It's going to be a positive for some, and it's going to be a negative for others. So we want to I want to point that out. It's not that it's all a win. It will be for those who will benefit from it. Don't like that. So I'll talk a little bit more about that, what that means in a bit. Then the last bullet on that page, you've got what's currently called the industrial class, which is your 7 largest customers. Those have already been on a demand and energy rate for some time. So this is the same we're looking at the same kind of rate for the other ones. Theirs is a little bit different. It brings into play some different coincident peak aspects where the power supply gets passed through directly, and it's a little more complicated, but it's essentially the same sort of setup where it's a demand and energy rate. And then you have 3 wholesale customers that you serve as well, and they're going to essentially be the same, a couple small changes there, but for the most part, they'll be the same. So that's what I'm proposing. Now, that all doesn't mean anything to you until you look at what it means to you, and what it means to your customers. So the next slide, I'm gonna talk about the slide, or the points on that slide is what it means kind of in big picture terms. But I've also given you, I think, you've got some paper in front of you that covers more specifically what it means to different customer sizes and things like that. If you want to look at more numbers and details, we can dig into that. So if you think about it this way, as I noted earlier, if we were just going to do an across the board increase, we do a 3% to everybody. We have to do that so the financial piece works. But because of what we're doing with the cost of service study, it's going to have different various impacts. Let's flip up the next one as well. Oops. There we go. So because of the cost of service study, the cost of service again tries to figure out which rate classes should pay what percentage of the cost. So first of all, there's often some classes that aren't paying quite enough and some that are paying, try to figure that out and switch that around and get everybody to pay their fair share, but subsidizing anybody else. That's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to be fair to everybody. So there's some of that. And then of course, the other impact is when we restructure those rates and do some things with the rates that has different impacts. So I'm going to cover just what you see there on the screen in terms of what it means for each rate class for the average customer. I'll point out right away, there is no such thing as an average customer. Obviously, people are either above and below, or you're not average every month. You might be right on the average some months, but so just real quickly, the average residential customer will see an increase of about 5.3%. So if you remember what I said earlier, the 3% is what everybody should get if we just did it across the board. So residential will pay slightly more than average. What that means is my cost of service numbers have shown that they're not quite paying enough. Class, not way out of whack or anything, but just a little bit. So that is what they would see. You've got some rural customers, rural residential customers, they would see a slightly larger increase of 7.7%. Small commercial is real similar to the residential, it's about 5.3. So those three classes will see slightly higher than average increases. Now, flipping it around, the ones, this is kind of a zero sum sort of a deal. The larger customers today are paying slightly too much according to my cost of service numbers. And so what you'd see there is that the actual large commercial class would see an increase of 2.1%, slightly less than the 3% average. Intermediates 2.0, industrials 2.1. So, right, they're all right about the same. They'll see an increase in total, but not quite up to the 3% average. The wholesale class is a small class. That's a little bit bigger decrease in their rates. It looks like a big number, but it isn't really that big relative to the rest of your utilities. It's kind of misleading there. So that one, they'll get a slight decrease, but it isn't that much, $3. So that's the story, big picture. Now the handouts that you see that you have in front of you show more detail. I don't know how much of these numbers you want to go through. I guess I didn't think we want to go too deep into the numbers, but I'm certainly willing to try to answer any questions about them or talk about any of this you want. I might just point out the residential rate, because that's kind of one that everybody pays, so to speak, one fashion or another, if you live in town or served by the utility, which should be the first one, I think, in your group of paper that you have there. It's called residential rate comparisons. What this table shows you is based on your usage level, what's the impact of this rate would be. And so if you look a little way down the table, maybe a quarter of the way down the table, there's a row that's bold. It starts with 681 kilowatt hours. So that's the average residential usage in the community. So that's taken all the residential kilowatt hours divided by 12 months, divided by the number of customers. So that's the average. Currently, they're paying about $90.64 is what their bill would be per month, just a little over 13 cents a kilowatt hour. The four columns to the right show what the proposed rate would be, what the impact would be, and you can see there the bill would go up to $95.42, which is a little bit over 14 cents. That 5.3% increase that I mentioned earlier, that's that number. And what that means is about $4.78 a month increase. But each resident, to the average residential customer. If you go up and down the table, you can kind of see, I don't know if you know what your own usage is at your home, but someone with the larger homes with maybe still a little bit more, those with smaller, a little less in terms of dollars. But the entire class is going to see something between $4 and $8 or $9 at most, very high end increase in cost.
Your chart here, a little deceiving, because I think what you've done is you baked into the kilowatt hour rate, the base rate. Is that correct?
So that's the total, yeah, that's
So
the
basically you're taking their total bill divided by the usage, right?
average,
Okay.
yeah, that's the average cost.
Because we're sub 10 cents a kilowatt hour.
Yep.
You know, if you take that service charge out, so.
Yep. Right, so if you look below to it's got the proposed rate, you're at 9.9 cents.
Oh, yeah, yep, I got you, okay.
And if you compare it down below, there's the existing rate, what we're actually doing is increasing the customer charge to $4.30.
Well, the reason I point that out is because, you know, the whole reason I've always been against this service charge being so grand is because, you know, if you look at that first, you know, someone uses 200 kilowatt hours, they pay twice as much per kilowatt if you divide it across the usage. So I just don't want that. I don't want that kilowatt hour rate to be taken as changes in their rate. Like it's really just changing from, you're proposing it changing from 9.8 cents to 9.9 cents. Okay.
Yeah. Very little, yeah. Yeah,
Per
so
kilowatt hour, and the base charge, you're proposing no change to that base rate.
no, the base
that
rate
meter
is actually
fee.
going up.
It is going,
Yeah,
okay,
so at the very bottom there is 2370 is what the current number is.
yeah, oh, okay, going up,
Went up to 28.
28.
Which is what the cost of service study said it should be.
Yeah.
The issue that we have, or the issue that electric utility world has, is that there's a lot of fixed costs in electric utility, and they haven't been charged on that basis. They've been put into the energy charge. So the trend is to try to quit doing that. I think on your other rate classes, you did that last time. You got some pretty high customer charges on all the other rate classes except for the residential. So posing a bit of a bump this time in that. $4.30 a month increase with that. So I think so. But there's really no change in the energy piece, the kilowatt hour charge, that's exactly the same.
So when you do these models, like, that's what I've always wondered, because I've been on the council 10 years, we looked at this a couple different times. And, you know, the base rate is there to make sure, you know, we can keep the linemen, you know, there and equipment going and stuff, you know, independent of how much power we sell. You know, it kind of keeps that money flowing. Just for your own information, I have a solar energy consulting company, and I see electric rates all over the world, you know, different countries, different, you know, and a lot of my constituents argue with me a lot that we have high cost of power. Kilowatt hour wise, we don't.
Right.
One of the cheapest in the state is in Webster City per kilowatt hour. Just look at that. When you bake in that base rate, that's when we start getting up there because it's there. So when you look at these models, do you ever, you know, go, well, what if we just charge 13 cents a kilowatt hour? Like Alliant does, you know, 30, 40, you know, and then not have the base rate. Like what levers and bars do you pull, buttons do you push to kind of get those numbers up?
Sure. So the process is that you try to get into that customer charge those costs that don't vary based on usage. You know, certain fixed costs that every customer have, like getting a bill every month, paying for having this building and people in it that are here to do customer service, all that stuff. Doesn't matter if you use 1 kilowatt hour or 10,000, the cost is kind of the same. So that's the process you go through, is try to put those costs in those buckets and I don't know, and figure out what that needs to be for the customer. I mean, that's the process. If you took it all away and put it back to all of the energy, that's what it used to be. If you go back 50 years or whatever.
Right.
And what you find is that, you know, there's people that aren't paying really, if you use only 50 kilowatt hours, you're not paying the cost to have this building here and send the bill and all that stuff. So that was, you know, that's kind of where it all started. The trend is putting more and more cost into that. They preserve, and you know,
Well, I've seen that trend from this seat
You
too,
understand it perfectly.
because that base rate has gone up every time we've tweaked with rates.
Yeah.
And just so you can understand, my seat on this discussion is, you know, I gotta go to the grocery store tomorrow and talk to Ruth and, you know, Sue and so, and they're the folks that are using those 50 kilowatt hours a month. You know, so they're getting hit harder as the base rate goes up when you look at their actual usage. You know, and actually your chart here actually kind of points that out glaringly.
Yeah.
You know,
no,
the lower you,
yeah.
and what that does is it takes control out of the consumer. So when you raise the base rate, the people on a fixed income, you know, that also probably live in a home that's relatively empty and use very little power, can't go, well, I can just use a little less to save some money and to keep my budget in line to where, you know, I've been living. So that's what I kind of struggle with, is because it takes that power out of the consumer to just be more resourceful, use a little less power, and it'll affect my budget. When we just hit them with the base rate, it's like, they have no control. They can't then adjust with their usage to compensate for a raise in rate. So anyway, I just want that point to be thought about, kind of floating in the air as we discuss.
There's definitely a trade-off there. No question. And I get it. You be careful at the low end that not get too out of whack. You know, and so, you know, I mean, you wouldn't hurt my feelings if you told me you gotta leave it where it's at, but then we gotta raise the kilowatt hour charge.
No, of course.
You know,
And
so-
I've always been a proponent of raise the cost of what you're buying. You know, raise the,
except for, you know, my numbers show that they should be paying $28 a month, is what it really costs.
okay.
So that, I mean, that's the other counter.
And I agree. I mean, and by the way, first of all, I'm not debating you. I'm not arguing,
No.
but I agree.
Which is
Webster
right.
City is low power. And again, if people don't believe me, I'll show them a utility bill from, you know, the east side of the state, and it's insane. It's twice as much kilowatt hour. And it is a cheaper power because we're a municipal utility. We've kept that rate low, but again, that base rate kind of skews things.
So I wasn't planning to go through all these. There's a lot of information there. If somebody looked at it and has questions, I can try to answer them later.
And this is a work session too. We're not deciding, we're not adopting any recommendations. We're not deciding the rate hike right. Just clear.
Does anyone have any more questions? Yes, this one.
I do think industrial and heavy commercial users should be on a rate,
What's the demand rate?
yes, thank you, the demand rate. I think that makes sense.
Yep.
But
You know, so that question came up a couple years ago when that started talking about it. And I think I like that. Kind of an elegant way to do it, because what it does is it passes through directly what it taught you to serve them on the power supply side. And if they can adjust their load during peak times, they can really save some money. And we give them that, it's kind of given with choice to do that if they can. I know that some can. If you can, I think we can do it. And so we're sticking with that.
thank you for your work on this.
Gary,
Yeah, I question, we're putting in on the meters for a residential, correct? Are they gonna be on demand meters?
No, they're just,
They don't have the on demand capabilities built into them?
I don't believe so. They're just highly accurate radar meters that allow you to.
Electric, if they have the ability.
I
I think they do.
Are we doing that though?
So they can have you, so sooner or later, you're gonna go on demand for no, it's-
I mean, if we wanted to, but that's not the, yeah. I don't see that ever being. I mean, at least not.
well, if the electric rates go up more, it would definitely, because I mean, I know in Australia, when we have we can put certain utility, certain things on so they don't work when the demand's on. They get a cheaper rate, but of course our rates are a lot higher than first.
Putting in meters on the residential that are capable of doing on demand.
Yeah.
So that is something that will be looked at, and because otherwise the cost extra to put that in, they don't get it cheaper. when you had those functions.
I mean, I can safely say that's something we've never discussed or. I think it just,
Usually when you get more features to a product, it costs.
Well, but what it can do is actually lower it. It could lower it because on this case, like with the commercial guys, they have the option to be able to lower it.
But
They don't want to be on demand.
On demand, they have a way to know. They have a way of, they get, when, for example, when the factory was here, they were told when they were doing beyond on demand that when power was going to be higher. They were told that so they could shut down part of the plant and do different things.
But you know, by in the afternoon, don't you? Like, 7 o'clock at night or whatever, it's a higher, that's our on-demand time, isn't it? I mean, that's generally the way it is in most cities. It's first thing in the morning and when everyone comes home in the afternoons, the demand period. So if you can not use your electricity in those 2 hours of the day, you actually save yourself money. If you've got a meter that can read that.
Right.
That's what those meters are going to be.
I think just any meter.
Look,
Used to. What's that? Well, I mean, the meters are sophisticated enough that they can just they're electronic, and it's actually gives some good information to customers, including, yeah.
Homeowner has, do it 24 hours a day, and they can minimize their loads. But they've got to know when the on-demand hits, and that's when the electric, they have the demand for their services, when more people use it. As a residential customer, I don't know when that is. I mean, there again, when we have factories and industrial and commercial, they have the ability to be notified from the utility that they're going to on-demand.
Jerry, what you're saying though is. Because we bought these smart meters with that technology built in, you're making the assumption that we may go to an on-demand type billing system for the residential rate. Well, I mean, maybe, yeah, I don't see that in the cards, but. I mean, yeah.
I mean, it's possible.
I mean, who knows, but we didn't look at those meters to do on-demand billing. We looked at those meters to do,
Well, it gives everybody more control. Is what it does. I mean,
Anything else I can answer?
I was just going to add, just for perspective, Alliant Energy sent out notices to the customers about the rate increases they're going to be proposing. So I think in the first year they're looking at a little over 7%, almost 8%, and then another 5.7% the year after, and then I think there's another 5% increase on the third year. So just to give you a perspective of what a larger investor-owned utility is doing.
yeah. Explain.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Any follow-up or additional information you'd want staff or Blair to come back with on that, or? Okay. If there's no other questions, we'll move on to the water side. Let me bring that up real quick. You got a couple different pages related to the water utility, and so to kind of give some perspective in terms of where we're at, we'll give you a breakdown on a couple of different scenarios. The 3 scenarios they kind of gave you worksheets on really kind of boil down to whether or not the city were to ever move forward with constructing a new water treatment facility. We currently have a water softening plant that does our water treatment for that. And so I know we had council approved and requested Bolton and Mink to evaluate the potential of constructing a reverse osmosis facility. And we had considered acquiring some property earlier in the year that we did not move forward with acquiring. But the council reviewed the information and decided at that time not to pursue purchasing that property. But the evaluation still provided some helpful information to provide perspective in terms of the age and some of the considerations that were factored into in that evaluation. Primarily was the lack of redundancy with the lime soda ash softening process that's currently used at the current facility. We also have the potential for future requirements if EPA and the DNR impose new restrictions and treatment requirements for PFAS in the near future, as well as just the aging infrastructure of the current water treatment facility. Back in 2008, there was an asset management plan that Bolton and Mink had put together and identified some critical and core components of the plant that would be reaching a useful life, and we're nearing that useful life for some of those key components. So there will be some investment required from the city in order to upgrade the plant to replace those components. And then just the difficulty of in the future, we're going to start seeing some challenges with the application of our lime softening sludge. We currently spread the sludge and on farm grounds, particularly also with the farm grounds owned by the Kendall Young Library Trust. And so that's going to be a future consideration as we start seeing more and more farmers and ag properties that are reluctant or increase the cost for the application of lime sludge for that. And so, but one of the key factors with the asset management plan is that we do have some components at the current water treatment facility that are going to be reaching a useful life. So you will be faced with the question in terms of, do we invest in the current facility, knowing that it has some limitations that we won't be able to address in the future, both in terms of space as well as redundancy. Right now, we have to shut down the water treatment plant for a 2 to 3 week period at a time in order to do catch up on maintenance as well as other preventive maintenance and cleaning aspects of the current site. That reduces the ability to soften during that period of time, and oftentimes leads to concerns or complaints about the hardness of the water. Or do we go with RO in order to be able to treat the water at a higher level, and that has other considerations that would require the construction of a new plant or acquiring property adjacent to the current water treatment plant and modifying some of our processes and infrastructure to be able to serve that. So there's pros and cons to both. I know we looked at that back in the spring and council decided to hold off on acquiring additional property at that time, but that's some of those considerations are reflected in the 3 scenarios that PFM had kind of put together for that. So with that, I will turn it over to John Burmeister and Suzanne Gerlach to kind of go over their rate analysis. I'll try to zoom in as best as possible, but council has this in front of them as well. So.
All right, very good. Maybe I'll start off John Burmeister with KFM, and then I'll turn it over to Suzanne for some of the details. But as Daniel indicated, there are 3 different scenarios that we have here for you this evening. We did look at your last 3 years of audited financial statements. You'll also see in the analysis that Doty was able to give us the unaudited 2023 data. We'll update that once the audit data is available shortly as well. And then we also put in your fiscal 24 budget. And then Doty keeps a pretty detailed oriented projection of the operating expenses. And that goes out to fiscal 25, 26, 27, 28. So we've built those numbers in there as well in the operating expense data. As Daniel indicated, we have 3 kind of different scenarios for you. The first one is a new water treatment plant. And so just as a number, you'll see in the CIP number there in the green, it's about $20.75 million. And the big heavy part of that expenditure would be fiscal 26 and 27. And then that would entail you to be borrowing some money to undertake that project. So we started looking at your net revenue, your CIP, your cash balance, when you need to ultimately sell those bonds, and kind of tried to figure out what the rate adjustment needs to be there. The next scenario that we looked at that I think Daniel has up on the board actually is what happens if we just don't do the water treatment plant? We just keep making existing improvements to the plant that you have. And so one number to remember in the back of your mind is 16.3 million. So the new treatment plant was 720.75 million. And so this existing plant scenario has 16.3 million. And that was an analysis that the city staff did to kind of look at what do we need to do to keep the plant operational. And Dan, you might have some additional insights on that because it was a kind of a look at what the improvements that needed to be. So we layered those projects in, and what that tells you is that expenditures, the expenditure of that money was slower. So it allowed you to build your rates up slower, fast to get into that expenditure mode versus the treatment plant. And then the third scenario that we have here for you is what happens if we try to have the local option sales tax monies fund more of the miscellaneous water improvement aspects of some of those projects. And so that was kind of the third scenario. And so you can see that the difference between these three scenarios is the treatment plant, because that was coming on very quickly. We needed to, and then remember now when we adjust your rates right now, we're only getting half of the fiscal year for fiscal year 24 because we're already halfway through that. So we have some big expenditures going on in fiscal year 24 that we're trying to make the rates high enough to make the cash positive in fiscal year 24. And then also build up for the projects that are coming forward into the future. And so we had a 75% adjustment on the new water plant, to build up the cash, to take on the bonds, to hit the additional bonds test, and then to meet the 3-month test. So we have a bunch of tests that we're watching for. The existing plant, which is what you kind of have, I guess you've got the one that has the local option sales tax, that had a 55% adjustment. And because those expenditures were slower over time, and we're using some more local option sales tax monies built in here. And then the third scenario was to try and use the local option sales tax money in a stronger basis, push off some of those expenditures. And so the third scenario we had was a 30% adjustment to trying to get some of that flow in there. And so that's kind of the three big picture scenarios. So I don't know, Suzanne, if you wanted to kind of highlight some of the more components aspects of each one of these three pieces.
The difference between the one that has the lowest rate increases, the 30%, the 25, the 15, and the 10. In that case, its loss is paying for the other capital outside of the water treatment. So all of these scenarios include some sort of substantial improvement to the water treatment because the existing plant is at the end of its useful life. So we either have to improve what you have and stay with what you have or move to the RO water treatment process. And so in this version, it assumes that you're going to work with the existing plant, make those improvements over time, and then loss is going to bring in money to pay for the ongoing other water main needs and other ongoing capital, because there is additional capital outside of just the water treatment facility. So that's the impact here.
How much of the lost money are you talking about?
In total, $1.63 million over a 3-year period. And so, and I know Dodie, I think that fund has, I think you sent me the cash balance, something.
I have a spreadsheet showing you what it would do to your lost fund.
Well, yeah, we went 2 years. Considering we're paying for our roads with that. We have a fairly good build up at the moment of it.
And Daniel, maybe on the cash flow there, I'd like to point out, if you scroll to row 48, there are little numbers off to the left of the description. These, keep going down. Keep going down. This is where I really kind of wanted to highlight. You can see in fiscal year 21 that the cash, had $3.496 million. And so you've been investing pretty heavily into the water fund. You can see then in fiscal year 22 that dropped to 1.6 million. Your water fund produced like 370,000 there in row 38, and you drew the cash down pretty heavily there in fiscal year 22, and that's continuing in fiscal year 23. You could see your water fund produced about 439,000 from operations. You spent $1,048,000 in capital outlays, some various transfers to the general fund. And so now you can see in that very row, everyone see the 625, 267. So that means the water fund now, the cash is kind of at the minimum levels that you want it to be. You don't want it to go much lower than that. And so now it's a function of protecting the cash balance because there isn't any more of a draw that we can have it go down. What additional monies can we bring in? And you can see the 1,146,000, that's the ARPA money coming in there. And then the 853,000 is the local option sales tax money. And then there's additional local option sales tax money at the 425 there above. So we're now in a position where we're trying to raise rates as high as we can, quite honestly, and protect the cash balance and find other monies to keep your cash balance at the very minimum of about a 26-30%, which is about 3 months reserved from an operational perspective. So that's the challenges. And if you scroll down, keep down. Oh, I guess maybe it wasn't. Yeah, keep going down a little bit more. Yep, keep going all the way down below that, Daniel. Yeah, and the other thing we're also testing is the city makes transfers from the water fund into the general fund. And there's a committee out there who monitors this. I think your auditor monitors this as well. They want you to have at least 3 months of operating reserves on hand. And you can see in fiscal year 24, there's just nothing I could do in terms of raising the adjustments high enough and bring enough money in to protect that. So there could be a situation where your auditor says you can't make that transfer to the general fund. It needs to be trapped in the water fund because the reserves are too low. And you can see that the next year we try to get that as positive and then correct it going forward. And so that was some of the reasoning for some of our adjustment timing. We're also monitoring additional bonds tests to make sure the bonds can be sold and meet all those rules as well. So we've got a bunch of things that we're monitoring here through these different scenarios. And here in the green there, you can see that the existing water treatment plant improvements, how that's kind of phased in slower over time. With the big $6 million chunk, $6.6 million, I want to say off the top of my head, that was the well that was going to come out in 30. So it was just a little bit of a slower expenditure on the plant versus, I don't know if Daniel, if you could bring up the one that has the new treatment plant showing that same area. Yep, right there. You can see that the expenditure for the plant was heavier in earlier. So you needed to adjust your rates faster to accommodate for that. At the $10 million there. So that was the kind of the genesis for the and then the other challenge is your operating expenses are growing. They're growing as well with trying to, I think, to maintain, Dodie, correct me if I'm wrong, kind of the existing plant. Those expenses are just going up as well. So you've got that challenge as well.
I don't see anything wrong with the amount of money you're talking about out of the loss. I mean, it can afford it over 3 years.
Yeah. And that definitely takes.
That's not an unreasonable thing.
And that definitely takes pressure off that immediate rate increase we needed, as you can see from these scenarios. So the extent that that's actually saves, helps quite a bit.
Yeah.
So the one scenario that we didn't run, I guess, would be the new RO treatment plant with the additional loss monies. It gets hard when we have so many different scenarios, these cash flows, putting all these cash flows in front of you. So I guess the first question is, what are your thoughts on, are we thinking it's a existing plant rehab, or are you leaning towards the RO? Because that would be a scenario I'd recommend running to see if you're leaning towards a new plant, what does it look like to do the same thing? Because I just added the loss to the lower cost option to try and get those that's the lowest rate increases we could get to in the analysis that we did.
Well, I guess we don't really know the reality of how long our plant will last for sure. The plant we have now. And the problem is, right at this very minute tonight, is we won't have the staff to go and build one in the next year anyway. We won't even have management to do it. So I can't see us really. I mean, obviously we have to do something with our water plant here with our funding. But I mean, I think that's something we've got to look more into, but there's probably no reason. There's no reason why we wouldn't want to know those figures. Okay. Because it's still the RO looks like it may be, like you said, it's 116 million, 120. I mean, But, I guess the unknown part is always like anything we have is, we someone puts how long will your car last? One car does 200,000, no worries at all, the other one does 300,000, it's like they were the same model, why did they blow up? And it's the same thing with this stuff, it's fortunately, if you can go buy another car really quickly, you can't get a new water plant.
And Cody, correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding, city staff is they're continuing to look through those operating expenses to study those to see if the projections that we put in here are accurate enough, or can there be some reductions? And so I think you've made some progress on that as well.
Yeah.
So we can put that in here as well as the whole Webster.
By budget, but we had
Yeah.
the projection of a 25 budget from last year's budget. And I
Yeah.
think that's one of the things we were talking about is looking at every possible line item to see, do we really need as much? Because there was significant growth in costs.
Yeah.
In the, because I think the plant is at, it's.
And is that, because if you look, on the top of our sheets, we did the 15% increase in 2022. And again, later that year. All three of these scenarios, the water rate grows, 80-90% in 3 or 4 years, no matter what scenario you would pick. I mean, and that's the story I'm taking from this is water is going to be nearly double in 5 years. So, I mean, to get back to your original question, yes, I would be interested to see what the new plant looks like with the lost help. And we're thinking that's about a third of the lost funds over 3 years. That you think what do we do about it?
No, that's not on there. That's, yeah.
No, it's not the RO, but I mean, roughly what we get in lost each year is $1 million and change, right? And if we're going to use that over 3 years, it's about a third of what we get in lost. Is that accurate-ish?
Yeah.
So I would be interested in seeing that model, but I don't think it's really going to shake out any different, right? 5 or 6 years, it's still going to be 80-90% higher, right? So we're acclimating ourselves to the new normal. Just in what capacity?
But the benefit of looking at the lost funds added to it is if we do decide to go that route, I agree. I think we want to know what that looks like because it will have an effect on at least lowering the first few years increases. So.
Yeah, that acclimation, it's pretty jarring for a 75% increase, and not saying we do, like, I echo some of the mayor's comments of, are we going to move forward with a new plant next year or two? Probably not. I mean, we got a lot of stuff going on right now, but we definitely need to plan for it. I think this is the whole goal of this is we're financially preparing for it and a little bit of mentally preparing for it. So I guess what I'm getting at is I would like to see that model of a new plant with lost. And what's it look like if we shift, like, say we do look at like 2028 or something like that to maybe build it. Like if we shift like a goal, does that help, the rate increases if we shift kind of our I guess our finish thing up a couple years. But then again, there is the more ongoing maintenance. So that's a very naive comment I'm making right now. I don't really know if that's in the cards, but if we shifted that might help.
To your point, do you have staff to build a new wastewater treatment facility? Water treatment facility at the same time? That's a lot. That's a lot at one time for just projects.
Don't forget the electric projects too.
And
Yeah, and then the only thing we'll want to be cognizant of is by when I've gotten hit by this, you shift back, but there's inflationary adjustments to shifting it into the future. So we just want to be real cognizant of the shift will definitely help, but it's not going to be the same dollar today as it is 2 years from now. So naively, I had been forecasting that when I was younger, and all of a sudden it's more expensive. Well, it's 5 years in the future, and there's always inflationary pressure, especially in today's environment.
Is your cost to continue to upkeep the existing plant's gonna go up. So
That's right.
whether it's you're going new or whether you're looking at existing, you're still gonna have increases.
And I don't want this comment to come off as like we're punting, right? We're pushing this off into a future council or a future discussion. It just, we got a lot of plates spinning right now, financially and bandwidth wise. So Yeah, so again, I don't want that comment to be read in the paper tomorrow or taken by anyone listening is like, we're like, hey, just push it off. It's just, this is a need and we're addressing it. We're looking at it now. And I think it's gonna put us in a much better position than we're in for the wastewater treatment plant.
I think it makes sense what you said to kind of look at what year is that biggest expense? You know, can you say 4 years, 5 years of routine maintenance, then be talking before you get a $7 or $8 million, cost, where does it make the most sense along that? Say 10-year plan.
Timeline, yeah,
Timeline.
yeah.
The one thing, how long would it take you to put together scenario with loss for a new treatment plant?
I'm working on it right now.
The one thing that I'd want council to understand, because I know Brent Hinton is working on the general fund side of things, and he's looking at as tight as the general fund is, and not knowing what the property tax legislation is going to do. He was looking at loss to provide the city flexibility on the general fund side. So
Yeah.
Council's gonna be faced with a decision. Do you want to keep the flexibility of using loss to offset general fund expenses or tie that up for water? And I remember when I came back in 21, we were talking about, or you guys were talking about loss to help offset the cost of the wastewater treatment plant. And I remember we talked about not tying that up so that it gives you that flexibility because of where the general fund was trending. So we're back in that question of just what's going to be the best option long-term wise to give you that flexibility. Short-term loss can probably give you the flexibility, but long-term, if you tie up the sales tax revenue and then, the way our legislature is going, they may touch sales tax at some point in the future as well. And then that further reduces your flexibility both for general fund and or utility. So.
Yeah, which is why you don't want to tie lost to 20-year commitment.
And we are assuming just one-time infusions in 3 different
Exactly.
fiscal years.
And that's,
Now-
that works. It's the tying it up for 25 years that really doesn't work because then it's gone for 25 years.
And so just as I'm working through the numbers, I think that the other thing that would be really helpful is to get a final 25 budget, or at least a more final 25 budget, because I think it sounds like staff's working really hard because O&M was increasing significantly on top of all of the capital needs. So if we can work with staff to get, I would like an updated 25 budget, especially when we're talking about as larger rate increases as we have on the table. From what just preliminary discussions, I don't want to say anything, but it looks like we might be closer to the 30%. I don't know that we need the 75 and maybe still be able to do the RO preliminarily. So if 30% is a goal now, if 30% is the lowest goal in all of the scenarios, then we're looking at a January implementation if you're ready to do that. And then we can keep running the scenarios. I mean, I don't know that we're going to be able to get it much lower than 30%, I guess is what I'm saying, in any of the options.
You were trying to bring a new water rate in by January? Or would you just?
Yeah, and the thought was to try and get
as much as we can in fiscal 25.
Yeah, in fiscal 24.
We wouldn't even have time to bring it in by January.
Yeah, so we're probably gonna push that back a little bit too. Cause I don't know that we're gonna get it done.
See it getting done.
Yeah.
Well,
when
I had to develop this, I thought that the rate adjustment that you do in January would be in lieu of anything in July of 24. So this would be your fiscal year 25 adjustment just done in January.
Yeah.
And if you look at the cash flow, we need the revenue jump adjustment earlier, faster, because we're just running out of cash in the water fund because of the capital projects. But with the lost money coming in, it's going to help buy you time to alleviate that.
So I feel like maybe we can rerun. I think we're down to 2 scenarios now. It would be the RO with the additional loss and then the existing plant improvements. So then we're down to 2 scenarios. Look at what that looks like. Maybe assume a March instead of January, just because I'll need 3 readings. Maybe we'll do a March of 24, give you more time to digest. If you want us to come back, happy to do that. But I think just preliminary again, and I want to get the 25 budget. That'll give staff time to get through the rest of the 25 budget.
I think I wanted to point out, at least for council and the staff that's aware, to give you an example, what those expenses that we're incurring that are increasing, I think the last 2 or 3 years, chemicals for the water treatment plant, we've seen double digit 20 and 30% increases for some of the chemicals used. There was a shortage of CO2 and that added for double digit increases in the cost that we incur. And so when they talk about expenses are going up, I mean, I'm gonna say it's not that it's going towards personnel and salaries. We're seeing the other operating expenses and material that are going up, and we're haven't even touched the capital costs related to constructing a new plant.
Thank you for this. It's helpful to see it as you presented it and helps us kind of get our heads around it. So I appreciate it.
Well, and showing 75% and coming back with 30 feels like good news, I guess, right? You feel a lot better about 30%, but you can work to get it down.
So just to recap, so council, we want PFM to continue to work on the lost option, both in terms of existing treatment plan improvements and using lost to be incorporated into a portion of the new plant construction. Look at those two scenarios.
Short-term use of the lost.
Yes.
You get that? I was just wondering.
Can you say it again, please, Daniel?
Using local option sales tax on a short-term basis to help fund either the scenario with constructing a new water treatment facility or investing in upgrading the existing treatment facility.
The loss would be used for the other water main improvements.
Yeah, and probably the key thing, Bob, to refrain is when we're talking about the water utility, it's not just the water treatment, it's the water distribution system, the mains, the infrastructure under the road pertaining to the water utility. So it's the fund goes to fund all of that.
Because that's the big base that's been drawn down out of there the last few years.
Yeah.
That's where it went.
Yes.
From doing Second Street and lots of the stuff. So,
Okay.
And then I guess, I mean, I know that PFM had looked at a possible January date in order to build up the cash for what's remaining of the fiscal year. And I think if we're doing, it'll require an ordinance change. So we can prepare and plan for that interim increase if council wants, so that at least we get the introduction and the first reading or maybe the second reading before January, so that you're not waiting. We're here at the end of November, you're not waiting 4 months. I mean, that's just cash flow that goes to help reduce the magnitude of the impact down the road. So
As much as I'd like to delay, maybe that's the best route to go to get started with them. Maybe just start at 30% where that's kind of the projection.
Yeah, I hate to say that too, but I mean, obviously there's going to be a rate hike. Pushing it out further is reckless. So, yeah, I agree.
yeah.
do you feel that 30 is going to be, or do they have the option of going lower at this time until you finalize your?
I think our personal recommendation is always start with the biggest and try and make them smaller going forward.
That's what I was thinking.
That's
I
just
would think
generally.
if we could do 30 now and then next year we didn't have to do 30 again.
That's how I like.
That's just generally easy. It's just better. Now 30% would be around $15.70 per month on a 4,000 gallon household bill. So that's around $15.70. Just want to say that.
4,000 gallon, is that the average?
I think your average
Yeah.
might be a little bit less than that when we
that's a
look.
little
I
less.
think 3,000 gallons.
Oh, we looked at it last.
Yeah, it was actually closer to, use units, don't you?
Yeah, it's cubic feet adjusted for gallons.
I guess if the cost of deodorant doesn't go up too much, you can shower less. Sit there and goes the other way around. There isn't any good side of this, but it's what it is.
That's the good side.
So if we understood Matt and Logan's comment, you want staff to prepare for that interim increase?
I would suggest yes, and I'd say 50%, then we can always go.
Introduction. I think
Yes,
if
correct.
Suzanne,
Newspaper.
if that's the route they go, we can
Yeah.
plan on the introduction. We can plan on the introduction of the ordinance for Monday. And then possibly look at doing first reading December 4th. That works out.
The sooner they're implemented, hopefully the lower they'll be in the future. That's always the goal. So.
Any additional information you'd like PFM to come back or? Just those two scenarios and that piece.
Find it, $10 million to get somewhere.
Yeah, so what we'll do is we'll update this for the audit. We'll update this for the fiscal year 25. We're gonna study the operating expenses to see if there's any tweaks there. We're gonna look at trying to maybe push back some of the timing of the plant to see if that. And then look at kind of the timing of some of the local option sales tax monies. Does that help smooth this ride slower into the future? So we'll look at all of that and bring that back to
Well,
council.
I two scenarios back, one with the existing plant improvements and then one with the new RO plant.
Yeah.
That's,
The plan is to take some of the lost money to top it up right now, isn't it?
yeah, we have it in the budget and the first transfer would be in 24.
Right, but one of the other things I'm gonna look at is transferring back to the water,
Yeah, that's what the.
Yeah.
the
you
funding
gotta
for the
transfer
Lincoln,
some of that
Lincoln
stuff.
Drive and the 2021 HMA, the water portions of those.
Yeah.
Of transferring back. I just need to make sure that it's not interfering with bond money, so.
Oh, yeah, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the one bad thing about interest rates, though.
All right. Well, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
What else we got?
I think that was it.
Call for motion to adjourn.
Move to approve.
All those in favour say aye. Thanks, everybody.
We're gonna switch it.
7:15.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I really think they're buying to me. Hopefully, one of this, or this or that. You know, one of these.
Yeah,
And anyway.
it'd be nice, especially with that series of that.
Yeah.
But yeah.
We need to do-